Today, I'm going to tell you a story about how I volunteered for a scientific study in which my brain was zapped with electricity for $60 and how that might have given me a superpower. But before that, I'm going to tell you a story about handedness. I taught myself how to use my left hand, as in my non-dominant hand, to draw and paint with when I was in art school, and the somewhat surprising benefits and insights that gave me. Meanwhile, I'm going to be sketching today using Procreate's symmetry tool. I don't often use the symmetry tool in my usual work. Sometimes I'll use it when I'm drawing architectural stuff or more technical stuff, but I've seen online a lot of people use the symmetry tool to make these beautiful portraits. So I wanted to try for the first time to sketch a more polished and detailed portrait using the Procreate symmetry tool. You'll see as I go through this sketch that I transform it from one thing into another, and I really enjoyed doing that. This is something that I actually used to do in art school when I was painting using traditional paints, where I would paint a large mural-sized painting and then paint over it the next week completely and make a new painting on top of the old one. So it was really interesting to return to that technique with digital art. By the end of the video, hopefully you'll see how these stories all come together and it'll all make sense. I recorded this in multiple locations, so you'll probably hear the sound changing throughout. I had been staying at my parents' house for the most part, and then in the middle of recording the narration for this video, I traveled back to my apartment in New York City and recorded some of it there. So you're probably going to hear some ups and downs with the audio, and hopefully it's not too distracting. When I was in college, I taught myself how to draw and paint with my left hand, just because I always was fascinated by people who are ambidextrous, and I was curious what it would be like to be able to draw or paint with both hands. It didn't take super long, I'd spent a couple of weeks learning how to do it. The biggest obstacle was getting over the idea that it would be hard to do it, or that it was weird to do it. I think getting over that mental hurdle was the biggest factor in me being able to learn how to do it. And I'm not saying that I learned to master drawing with my left hand or painting with my left hand, but I got to a point where I was able to get by doing it, to kind of reassure myself, I think, that if anything happened to my dominant hand, to my right hand, that I would still be able to paint, that I would still be able to draw. And I found it was also useful when I was painting that I could switch hands and get a fine line detail from an angle that would otherwise be really difficult with my right hand. With drawing, a surprising benefit that I found was that I didn't have the muscle memory that my right hand had. When I drew with my left hand, my drawings were a lot more accurate when I was drawing from life. So if I was trying to draw something that I was looking at and I was drawing with my left hand, then the proportions and the rendering would all be a lot more realistic, whereas when I drew with my right hand, there would kind of be some cartoony elements or unrealistic elements that were not true to life. And I think it was just because my right hand had so much muscle memory from years and years of drawing, and because I originally learned to draw by drawing cartoons first instead of drawing from life first. So that was an interesting revelation, and throughout my fine art career, if I ever needed to check if I was drawing something correctly, switching hands and drawing it with my left hand or painting it with my left hand for a little bit would always tell me immediately whether what I was drawing was accurate or not. If you've ever used the mirror technique to check your drawings, to see if there's a lean or to see if there's any mistakes, this is when you hold a mirror up to an image, or nowadays if you're drawing digitally, you simply flip the image horizontal, and just by seeing it in a fresh light, you're able to instantly see all the mistakes that you didn't see before. Anyway, so I found that when I painted and drew with my left hand, my brain kind of did that flip on its own without using a mirror and without using the horizontal flip. So it's hard to describe. Even without using my left hand, if I just kind of this is gonna sound really weird and maybe spiritual, but I kind of mentally put my energy into my left hand, and I'm able to make a mental flip over to the other side and see the drawing in a new light without flipping all that stuff in reality. Nowadays, I'm really rusty with my left hand, but maybe one of these days I will do a demonstration drawing with with both hands. And then what was really fun as well was when I was painting and working on the fine art stuff was painting with both hands. And that's got to be like one of the best feelings in the world. And again, being able to paint with both hands, it's like one of those things that seems like it's impressive. And there's so many artists that like make viral content of painting with both hands and stuff, but it's a skill just like anything else that you can learn. And I recommend if you want to learn how to do it, then just start with your left hand or your non-dominant hand first, and then eventually like learn to paint with both hands at once. Mentally, you kind of imagining that your whole body is kind of creating the image. And I think that it's probably easier to paint or draw with both hands when you're working at a larger scale too. Like I think it's probably much harder if you're getting into tiny little details. But I think another trick is like you have to move at once. Like you have to move in sync with your whole body, if that makes sense. But anyway, super fun, and I highly recommend it, at least to experience it. Okay, so now I'm in a new place because I was at my parents' house for the holidays for an extended visit, and now I'm back at my apartment. So there's probably going to be a noticeable audio difference, so that's why. Anyway, I wanted to add another symmetry / handedness related story. I want to say that this happened after graduation because this was during the time where I was really struggling to find enough employment to make ends meet and to pay the bills. And so I was taking any opportunity to make money possible. I was working a lot of event photography, event videography gigs around New York City, where I was running around and recording, documenting parties. I would record the events, edit the videos and photos for various price points. I think at the time I was making anywhere between $100 to $200, maybe $250 on a good night. And that would be for anywhere between 6 hours to 12 hours of work, sometimes overnight, actually a lot of time overnight. And at the time, that money went a little bit further, but it was still quite low. Otherwise, I was working on film sets as a PA, which is a production assistant. That's the type of role where you go get coffee for people and run around and pick up little things needed for the set, like if they run out of tape or if they need someone to deliver a package or help with equipment, then you'd kind of fill that role. So that's the kind of thing I was doing. I found out that a school had this department where the students were basically performing science experiments on people and they needed volunteers. So a lot of the experiments were more psychological in nature, where they would ask you questions and have you play a game or something, and then they would record your answers. And somehow that told them some data that they were investigating as part of their broader PhD program. And you could get paid anywhere between like $5 to $10 to $15 to $20 per, sometimes $25. Someone in the program informed me that there was another experiment coming up that was paying a little bit more because it was a little more invasive. So the procedure went like this. They would attach electrodes to your skull, like to the skin on your skull in your hair. And then they would run electricity between the electrodes through your brain, and they would examine the results. This particular study happened 3 times. So over the course of, I think, a week, you went back every other day or something like that, and you had your brain zapped, and you played a game after you had your brain zapped for about like 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. It seemed like a long time. And for this, they were paying, I believe it was $60. Because it was like $20 per. And that seemed like, wow, like that's a profit for basically doing nothing. So to start off the experiment, they had me sit down and answer a questionnaire. The questionnaire seemed really random. It had questions like what did you eat this morning? What's your favorite color? Questions that didn't seem scientific at all. But I know now that they do that so that they can hide what they are experimenting on. Because if the test subject knows what you're experimenting on, then it ruins the entire study. Because then the test subject has bias. So this questionnaire was quite long. It was a few pages, I believe. And again, it was questions that seemed totally random. Questions like, how long do you brush your teeth in the morning? What's your favorite food? What type of shoes are you wearing now? Which hand do you write with? Do you prefer spicy or non-spicy foods? So the first session that we had, they attached the electrodes and turned it on, and it didn't feel like anything at all. I know now that there's like no nerve endings in your actual brain, even though your brain is like the central part of the nervous system. I played a game where you had to concentrate really hard to do something. It was something like Pong. Like if you've ever played the game Pong, where you're trying to move the levers on either side of a screen and you're trying to make it so that the ball doesn't escape. So I played that for a while and then I went home. Okay, got paid $20. All right. Oh, and then the catch was too, I believe that you had to complete the 3 sessions or else they wouldn't pay you. Or at least they wouldn't pay you the full amount because they needed you to complete the 3 sessions for their experiment. The data would be incomplete if you didn't show up for all 3. So first session, easy. Second session, they did the same thing. And that time I felt like a tingling in the spots where they put the electrodes, and they put the electrodes in the same spot each time. And I found actually that it was a little bit harder to concentrate during the game, but I don't know if that was just a mental block, like a placebo effect, or whether that was actually happening. And then the third time I almost tapped out halfway through because for some reason the electrodes really burned that day. I just remember it being really painful, and where like my hair was and stuff, I was a little worried that it was gonna burn my hair and stuff. They encouraged me to complete it and I just stuck with it. And I found that time when I played the game, it was even harder to concentrate. And again, I have no idea what they actually were studying for sure. I have my thoughts about it, which I'll get to in a second. So it might have just been a placebo effect, but I found that it was a bit harder to concentrate. So this is the 3rd session. So this was the end of the experiment, and they gave me the questionnaire that they gave me to begin with. It was the same exact questions. What is your favorite color? Do you prefer spicy foods or non-spicy foods? What shoes are you wearing today? What hand do you use to eat with? And I was shocked to realize that the night before this 3rd session, I had been eating somewhere. I think I was eating like Chinese food or Chinese takeout, but I was eating something like a bowl of soup. And halfway through eating, I realized that I was using my non-dominant hand to eat with. So the spoon was in my left hand, which I had never done before. And I thought, oh, that's a little odd, huh? I didn't connect it to the experiment at all until that moment when I saw that question, what hand do you use to eat with? And then I started to look at the other questions in the study, and I realized that throughout all of the questions mixed in with the rest, there were actually a lot of handedness questions kind of hidden in between the other stuff. So like between questions about like, what shoes are you wearing? What is your eye color? There'd be a question about like, do you grab things with your right hand or do you grab things with your left hand? Or like, do you brush your hair with your right hand? Or do you brush your hair with your left hand? But it was all phrased in this really careful way where the handedness questions didn't really stand out. So the first time that I did the questionnaire, I didn't notice that. And then the second time when they were asking me the same questions, it just made me realize that, oh wow, there's actually a trend going on here. And after this whole experiment, I asked the person running it, the PhD student, if I could get like a copy of the study once it was done. And he said, sure, but I never received it. So I really have no idea what they were actually experimenting on. But he did say that he was trying to figure out if he could use electricity or whatever he was doing to connect 2 different parts of the brain that normally wouldn't be connected. So I don't know if it affected my handedness. I've found that ever since then, I still am able to eat with my left hand, not as well as with my right hand. I also wonder, like, because this happened after I taught myself how to paint and draw with my left hand back in college. So I've always kind of wondered, like, did this happen in part because I had already primed myself for being able to use my left hand in other ways? And maybe just this experiment opened up something else? And it's entirely possible that this is not unusual at all and was just a fluke. But I'm pretty sure that I had never eaten with my left hand before then because of how unusual I found it when I realized that I was that night. My understanding from my friends and family who have left-hand dominance is that if you're like left-hand dominant, then it's more typical to have some level of ambidexterity where you do end up using your right hand for a lot of stuff just because like we're living in a right-handed world. So maybe for people who have a left-handedness, it's more typical to use your non-dominant hand for stuff. So I'm curious if this is like a right hand, left hand kind of thing where like if you're right hand dominant, then maybe you don't use your left hand barely at all for most things. Whereas if you're left-handed, maybe it's more normal to use both your hands. But let me know in the comments if you've done a similar thing where you find yourself using your non-dominant hand for something that you normally don't and that you didn't even realize that you could. Because maybe this is just like a normal thing that has nothing to do with the study and I'll never figure out what the study was actually for. So that's the story of how I had my brain zapped for $60 and might have gained a superpower. So let me know what you think of this format. This time I focused on telling stories that were related kind of to the topic of what I'm drawing, but not super specifically. I've found that in the analytics, you guys seem to tune out when I actually talk about what I'm drawing, so I did less of that this time. But if you want me to talk more about the techniques I'm using or my approach, then I'm super happy to talk about it. Just let me know in the comments. I think for the most part, my approach and my techniques are really straightforward. I don't use a lot of filters. Sometimes I'll use add, sometimes I'll use multiply, but really not that often. What I was doing here was pretty much all just drawing and painting layer upon layer. When I got to the statue drawing, I actually had flattened all of the layers from the drawing previously, so I think you'll see here and there when I open up my layers, panel that I'm basically working on one layer, and it's only when I get into the nitty-gritty highlights and little detailed stuff that I start adding layers on top of that, just in case I don't like how it turns out and I can just undo it. But for the most part, I'm blending and adding colors on top of colors and mixing and stuff like that. I might continue this drawing in the next video by working on top of it, and I have a few ideas of how and where this drawing could go. Well, I think that symmetrical drawings like this can look really cool, and it's really satisfying and fun to draw this way, but I wouldn't recommend using this as your baseline foundation of your whole drawing portfolio, because this is the kind of tool that can become a crutch really easily if you use it too much. I think it's important to be able to draw somewhat symmetrically and to be able to draw front-facing portraits without the use of a tool like this, but I think it can be really helpful for speed and if you're just drawing for fun. I know this is easier said than done. Even I really struggle with symmetrical drawings when I'm freehanding, and I struggle with front-facing portraiture, especially because I have a lean when I draw. When I started drawing, I was drawing mostly 3/4 view portraits looking off to the left, which is still the easiest drawing angle for me, but I think because I drew so many of those type of drawings in the early stages of my artistic journey, it just caused me to have a pretty severe lean from top right to bottom left, so that everything I draw is a little bit slanted that direction, and I don't notice it until I flip horizontal or look at it from a different angle. So easier said than done. One quick note about how I formatted this video is that on the left side of the screen is my full screen view. So that's what I was looking at when I was drawing. And then the right side of screen, I've zoomed in post so that you can see more of the details of what I'm actually doing. And you can see that for a lot of this drawing, I draw from pretty far away. I don't zoom in super close very often because I'm trying to focus on the bigger picture and not get too caught up in the little details, because that slows me down so much. And sometimes when you zoom in too closely and get caught up in those details, you actually make wrong decisions with the picture because you kind of forget what you're drawing. You forget what the bigger picture is. So that's why I draw from pretty far away, especially towards the end when I'm making general highlight adjustments. I'm zoomed out a lot in the actual drawing. So the moral of the stories today are: try drawing with your non-dominant hand because it's really fun and easier than you think, and it might give you some surprising benefits as an artist. And if you need extra cash, I think they still do those type of studies. Go find a college that has PhD students looking to zap people's brains, and you might make $60. If you decide to participate in a study at a PhD program in some college, then be careful about them zapping your brain, because you might end up with a somewhat useless superpower. Also, I don't know if it's necessary to make a disclaimer for this. I am not a doctor, I am not a scientist, and I am not a PhD student. I'm just an artist who is very desperate for cash at one point. Do not go out and attempt to electrify your brain. I hope you're having a good day. If you got something out of this video and are interested in seeing more videos like this, then consider subscribing to the channel. I have more how-to videos and more in-depth videos about drawing coming up, and I'll see you in the next one.